digital currencies. Discussing stablecoins has also led us to discover more about digital currencies. The panel looks into how central banks might adopt digital currencies that would enable local payment systems as well as transactions either locally or cross-border. Shant Manukyan from Ish Investment and the panelists are Charles Dossier from Consensus and Mariana Gospodinova from Crypto.com.
Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to this new session about digital currencies. And here I have Mariana Gospodinova of Crypto.com and Charles Dossier of Consensus with me. Guys, can I just ask for a brief introduction from both of you, please?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start. My name is Mariana, and I head the European operations of Crypto.com. I've been with the company for almost a year now, and I have previous backgrounds in financial services and also as part of the Binance team in Europe, where I set up the European operations for them a year ago.
Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Sant. So my name is Charles Yossi. I'm the director of Consensus here in Hong Kong. I also lead business development in Asia Pacific with our teams in Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and Japan. And before joining Consensus, I was with the Hong Kong government as head of fintech.
Thank you very much. Too bad we cannot host you here in Istanbul, but of course, those are extraordinary times indeed. So I'll start with Mariana. 2020 has been a very unfortunate year so far, and but also a very interesting case study, if I may say. We have an ongoing health crisis, a tech revolution, and also a major economic crisis. So do you think Bitcoin did manage to differentiate itself as an asset class in such an environment? And as a follow-up question, previously, we discussed a lot about Bitcoin technology. I mean, about the segregated witness and the second layer solutions such as Lightning Network. But in 2020, all I've been reading about is ETH 2.0, DOT, or Avalanche networks. What's going on with Bitcoin technology? Anything new?
Okay, well, to address the first part of your question, definitely the pandemic has caused a lot of disturbance on a global macroeconomical level. The insecurity definitely led to people searching for alternatives when it comes to putting their savings in or just to transacting. And that definitely gave a chance to cryptocurrencies, not just to Bitcoin, to shine in the pandemic crisis. There was one very important thing that the pandemic brought in, and this is the fact that the social distancing that we were forced to practice actually led to distancing in many other ways, meaning that e-commerce and transacting in general was taken online. And while this was already the case in many economies where e-commerce has been prevailing, the fact that the distancing was necessitated by the pandemic meant also that not just businesses, but also governments started looking into ways of digitizing their currencies. And we have seen a lot of instances with a lot of governments looking into issuing central bank digital currencies. That on itself obviously is spiking the interest in cryptocurrencies, and it created yet another opportunities for people to read more about it and potentially to invest in it. When it comes to the second part of your question, I think Charles is in a really good position to answer how did technology actually evolve, and especially when it comes to ETH 2.0. So I'll leave that part to him.
Sure, yeah, Charles, what would you like to say? Is the Bitcoin technology satisfactory for everyone, or anything we should do? What's your take on?
Whether it's satisfactory for everyone, it really depends on your views. So as a consumer, I think a lot of people should be really interested in the fact that a fully programmatical way of policing the supply and the functionalities of currencies are extremely interesting. But if you take a look from a governmental perspective, perhaps Bitcoin is inspiring, but is not necessarily the type of technology that they would resort to.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Charles, I'm sure you have a lot to add to. So your turn, please.
So I believe, coming back to the first part of your question, yes, COVID has been complicated for many of us, but in a way, for us in the world of enterprise blockchain solutions, it has accelerated the agenda of many of our customers. Should they be government, with some of the engagement we have with central banks, building for them CBDC infrastructure and CBDC projects, but also for all the banks and capital market players, which were pushed in a way with no other choice and going much faster in on their digitalization agenda, and blockchain and tokenization are a big part of it. So COVID has stimulated a lot of our customers, and this makes the team at Consensus extremely busy. Coming back to maybe the second part of your question on the technological capacity of Bitcoin against some other blockchain, and Ethereum is maybe one of them. I guess Bitcoin use case is now very clearly defined and is doing very well at this use case of store of value and kind of digital gold. As you know, there is not much smart contract capabilities on the blockchain technology as it is today. It's focusing on delivering very well a specific use case. And when you look at decentralized computation, when you look at smart contract with very mature capabilities, Ethereum comes to mind. I think we've seen in 2020 the very strong rise of DeFi, decentralized finance, which is mostly happening today on Ethereum. It has been stressing also the network, so much success and so much product market fit there is. So there is a very strong demand, and it probably really shows to the market and to the observers of the market that there is new use cases beside Bitcoin, and these use cases are growing at very fast pace. And Ethereum appears as a very good playground and platform to develop all these use cases. And DeFi, I think, has been very interesting for two reasons. For the creativity we've seen from the developers, I think a lot of these DeFi projects will leave behind them while they're growing some very fundamental piece of infrastructure for the ecosystem and for the new generation of finance. I'm thinking of automated market making. I'm thinking of stable coins, synthetic stable coins. I think there is some fundamentals which will remain in many years to come. But I think more importantly, this DeFi phenomenon, which we've been observing very strongly this year, has brought new type of people and new people to the blockchain ecosystem. It's not only the world of computer engineers. You also have a very big wave which came up of financial engineers. And this, the growth of this ecosystem and the growth of the people involved and building with the technology is, I think, a very positive that we have new additional blood and fresh blood and new talents and new type of talents and more variety of talents coming in. It's extremely promising for the years to come for the technology itself.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Actually, you have touched base my third question, but let's keep with DeFi in this case. Obviously, you have mentioned DeFi, but can you just briefly tell us what DeFi really is? I mean, is it a fad or is it something real? I have seen that almost $12 billion are locked in DeFi, so it's not some mambo jumbo or some fad. On the other hand, as a finance guy, when I see 8%, 11% yields in a project compared to 0% yields in the markets, it's kind of interesting. I mean, there should be some kind of risk in those projects. Can you just evaluate what kind of projects we are talking about, what DeFi is, what's the pros and cons, please?
Sure. Let's define what is DeFi, decentralized finance. And when the way I explain this to some of my friends from the traditional finance is, I'm just asking them to imagine if your HSBC account could be speaking with your Robinhood account, which can be speaking with your PayPal account and maybe speaking to your credit card. And all of this could be like, just imagine that all these services becomes very very in a very natural way combined together, or at least they can be combined together. They can communicate. If you look carefully, your bank is your bank today. Your lending company is usually a different ones.
Right.
Your credit card is a different business which is linked to your bank, but there is not so much symbiosis between all these services. So DeFi essentially bring modularity and composability between all these different services, which are reproduced in the world of blockchain. When you look at the very strong growth of DeFi, and one of the reasons is, I will say, probably some of the yield which some customers can find in this environment. And when you compare them with the yield from a bank and the yield you can find in DeFi, I think it's a very interesting comparison, because there is probably a problem in the banking system when they offer you 0% or 0.1% interest on your saving account. It doesn't look like everything is going right. On the other side, there is some DeFi project offering you double-digit yields. There is probably something which you need to pay attention to over there also. So I guess the right thing is in the middle, but it's important for everyone to understand that DeFi is very, very much a massive experiment. Why are we seeing such big numbers of yields offers? Is because people are trying some incentive to move assets from one project to another to attract more assets on their platform. Should it be for lending or for market making or for some other usage? And all these different silos of finance are kind of being replicated in the world of blockchain, with automation, with incentive programs. Some of these incentive programs, I think, will not last long. So there is probably the aspect, a little bit of a bubble somewhere there. But as I was mentioning earlier, I'm convinced that there is some very strong pieces of infrastructure which will remain. And these pieces of infrastructure will be public goods for the finance industry and for the society in general, which we will be able to build on top of, and build some more sustainable financial services of new generation.
Okay, great. Mariana, before I move to the next question, would you like to add anything for DeFi? What are your comments?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the interoperability topic that Charles has just touched upon, because the fact that the DeFi projects are built on open permissionless blockchains means that if one decentralized application has a certain feature, then another decentralized application can just take that feature and deploy it themselves without asking for a permission. And that definitely increases the usage of DeFi. But as seen right now, it's very, very small compared to the usage of the rest of cryptocurrencies, or even compared to the fiat currencies, right? And the advantages, however, are huge, and we can see them clearly. The interest rates on some of the projects are actually in the vicinity of triple digits, which is really incentivizing users to interact with more DeFi applications and put in more funds into DeFi projects. And then the ease of access to those DeFi projects is also significant, because on many occasions, all you need to have is internet, right? There are no barriers to entry, and very often no KYC process or anything that would actually mandate you to perform any checks on your identity.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Don't you think that will be a problem with the authorities?
I'll come to that on the disadvantages part. But as an advantage, this creates a further acceptance to the financial network of countries, for example, that are currently suffering from large unbanked ratios. Then when it comes to the disadvantages, clearly AML comes at mind, because moving forward, just like cryptocurrencies, I believe that the governments would want to put certain type of regulations over the decentralized projects. And that will be a challenge on its own, because decentralized finance is essentially a peer-to-peer interaction. And trying to regulate peer-to-peer transactions would prove to be extremely difficult. Now, of course, there is also the timeliness of that question, and when does it come to effect, or when would the government start looking into that? So there is certainly the risk of some countries looking into DeFi projects and defining them as not sustainable, and probably even blocking them on the long run. But as it stands right now, I think there's still a great opportunities for financial inclusion. Then something else to consider is also the security of such projects. On many instances, most of the projects actually cannot really be hacked unless there is the 51% attack present, but there is still the possibility for some exploits in the code, which if they're not audited properly could create issues. And what that brings to mind is obviously the way to assess which projects do you want to invest in as an investor and where do you actually want to put your money in. And as most of the cryptocurrencies projects, especially ones that are backed by companies or by people, what it makes sense to do is to check the founders of the project and to ensure that, for example, if you put your money and you're staking, let's say, for a certain period of time, would you be able to suffer any price fluctuation just to get the interest rate? Or if you, let's say, are using one of the loan projects, if it's a collateralized loan, if you put in a certain amount of, let's say, Fs to get a loan against that, when the loan to market value changes, would you be affected by that and will you lose your collateral? And then last but not least, very often when people have problems, like we like acting on our own and we very often don't realize the real participation of regulations within our life. But when things go south and when things actually go wrong, very often we want to complain. And usually in Europe, we complain to the regulator or to the government or to the financial ombudsman. And there is no such higher instance. Since it's decentralized, there's no instance to complain to. So these are all things that people have to take into consideration. It does pose certain risks to DeFi projects, but then again, the advantages are also significant. So it's up to investors to decide for themselves and ultimately be informed of what they're investing in.
Thank you very much, Mariana. And speaking of challenges, Charles, I think we are having a flood of research reports about central bank digital currencies lately. It's ECB and the BIS, and we have the IMF, etc. So what's the hustle here, and is it different compared to our credit cards? And also, do you think, for example, stable coins could survive among central bank digital currencies? Is that possible? Will cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies go together in the future?
That's a great question. If we take a step back, what has been really accelerating the agenda on the regulator side when it comes to CBDC, it's really the Libra phenomenon, which started about 2-3 years ago. Suddenly, there was a very large global organization with more than 2 billion customers thinking of creating their own currency in a digital format. And I think it was kind of a very big wake-up call for many regulators. So since then, as you mentioned, a lot of supranational regulators as well as the national regulators have been working on their own CBDC. Today, we estimate about 80% of the regulators and central banks globally are working on CBDC today. Some of them are in the early stage of the journey with doing mostly some research. Some others are building POCs and starting to get much closer to launch their own CBDC in production. Asia is extremely active. I think there is an infrastructure which is more nascent in Asia. It's easier for them to go directly with a new type of currencies, and how these CBDCs will interact and live besides the existing cryptocurrency world. I think, as Mariana was mentioning earlier, we have to remember that this bubble of cryptocurrency is actually in a macro level extremely tiny. And essentially, even though we are building with decentralized technology, which is trying to bring trust and building trustless systems, at the end of the day, you always realize that the end user is always expecting and trying to find trust somewhere. And I think this will be a very much a killer feature for CBDCs if they can bring the same comfort of use and the same experience as stable coins, but with the kind of approval and endorsement of central banks. I think this will be a very strong proposition for many people, and it's going to bring a lot of adoption. And what the ecosystem of blockchain and crypto overall will benefit from is maybe some of the use cases we are working with today in the crypto world will be affected by CBDCs or some other government initiative, but this will also grow the pie and grow the number of people involved with the technology and involved with the value proposition of digital assets. So I think it's more about growing the pie and letting people benefit more from the technology we are building every day, rather than trying to put this into competitions. We all know some people which will be always questioning digital asset and cryptocurrencies in general. And we also know that some people, even though they might have a question mark on the technology, they will benefit and probably really much enjoy digital assets. So if it comes from a central banks and it's a new and modern money, which comes with new features such as programmable money or directional money, I think it's going to be very beneficial for many more people. And ultimately, I think this is what we want to achieve is bring the benefit of the technology to more people, rather than trying to make certain type of technologies or certain types of token winners, when actually we want to grow the cake for more adoption.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Mariana, anything you would like to add, or I would like to move one step further into the future? We have discussed CBDC and DeFi, and recently the head of IMF said we need a second Bretton Woods system. How would you position the crypto world in such a new financial system in Bretton Woods 2?
Sure. Well, when the director of the IMF actually referred to the possibility of evoking a second instance of Bretton Woods scenario, they did not really envision cryptocurrencies, right? They were more speaking about another reinforcement of strong economical and political measures and policies that the IMF has to put in place in order to ensure that the world is moving through strongly within the pandemic scenario. That being said, they also looked into a lot of other social initiatives to help the world move forward. But in essence, what I think the IMF was missing in that statement is the fact that the adoption or the mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, the fact that central governments would be issuing or are looking into issuing their own central bank digital currencies is something that could serve as a swift change in monetary policies. It's not a second Bretton Woods scenario. That's definitely not the case, because clearly the monetary policies of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies and the ones that we currently see by central governments are extremely different, and they do not have the same principles, whereas fiat monies are absolutely unlimited in supply, which we have seen on numerous occasions with the stimuli currently being granted by certain governments. The Bitcoin supply is capped. Then, while monetary policies are dependent on a certain small and granted very smart number of individuals that are defining them, they're still human controlled, whereas the monetary policy of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are fully programmatical. When it comes to the mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, I still think that governments will play a fantastic role. But whether this happens or not boils down to two things. One, it's whether or not the governments will adopt the change in monetary policies. And the second one is the accessibility of crypto or of digital currencies across the world. And while accessibility can be easily achieved, if, let's say, I'll take China as an example, because they were the first ones who were researching, and they were heavily invested in creating a CBDC of their own. So if China creates a digital currency and it is available to anyone in China to tap into, in times of insecurity, such as during the pandemic, a lot of people will search for a better alternative than investing in fiat money. So if the government offers them the ability to directly purchase from the central bank or to hold with the central bank fiat digital currencies or digital backed fiat currencies, they would probably choose that against cryptocurrencies due to the volatility issues of the cryptocurrency. So that's a win for any centralized government that wants to proliferate the digitizing of funds. Then when it comes to the policies and the way these funds are governed, of course, the central bank issued digital currencies are somewhat contrary to the idea of the cryptocurrencies, right? Because although they're digitized, they are still controlled and backed by the government. And there is one key difference. While the cryptocurrencies are not considered a legal tender, any digital currency issued by the central bank would actually be considered a legal tender. So that also plays a huge role into the cryptocurrency adoption, because as Charles mentioned, right now in crypto, we see a lot of people who are tech savvy, a lot of people who are not afraid to invest because they understand the underlying technology. But to bring everyone in the crypto scene, we would actually need to have people believing in the digitizing of monetary assets. And this could happen with the help of central governments for sure.
Okay, speaking of the China example, are you guys worried about privacy? Obviously, in China, it's not a private type of currency, cryptocurrency. Do you think that would be a problem in the Western societies?
That's a great question. It's a public information. The team of Consensus in Hong Kong is working right now with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority on CBDCs, and obviously this privacy question will come when needed, and that's very interesting and very complex topic, because now you can imagine that your CBDC, the currency, let's say from France, Turkey, or Poland, or China, or Hong Kong, will start to move all over the world. And the reality of privacy comes in twofold. First, there is a relationship individuals have with their own data. As a Chinese consumer, you have a special relationship with your data. Maybe you're comfortable to give away your phone number. Maybe you're comfortable to do different things with your own data. And maybe as a European consumer, you will have a very different relationship with your data. So there is the user's data views, but there is also the regulations. And when you see the CBDCs, which will potentially move all over the world, and when they will be issued by governments, this privacy question will have to be solved, or at least to be discussed very openly, because it's going to be very complex. As you know, in Europe, you cannot pay anything with a US dollar. So it means whenever you send US dollar, it goes through a bank, and the bank will give you euros, right? But suddenly you will be able to have in your wallet maybe some digital US dollar, or maybe some digital Hong Kong dollar, and all these digital currencies from many different countries. And how will they behave with the regulations of where you spend them is a very big challenge to tackle. And also how people will be reacting when they receive a currency from another country with some different type of privacy setup. So I don't have really an answer for you, but I think it's a great question. Everyone is working on this right now to make sure that even though you bring more features and more fluidity to the money in this digital format, you will have also to lend the money in different hands of different people in different countries, and you have to think quite a lot on how to structure this to make sure it's successful and compliant and well accepted by the users.
Thank you very much. Very good insight. And we are about to end. So just a final question, Mariana. We have been hearing about some hedge funds allocating money into crypto, and then we heard about Square, and then it was next PayPal. So is corporate America making peace with crypto? First, they really didn't take it seriously, and now they are obviously moving more and more into both speaking of projects and also allocating money. So do you think Wall Street interest would be a curse or a blessing for crypto?
Ultimately, I think from an economical perspective, the fact that a lot of companies such as PayPal are adding cryptocurrencies to their portfolio, and some publicly listed companies are announcing that they're going to put a fraction of their reserves in Bitcoin, would spike a lot of interest in cryptocurrencies as a whole. And indeed, as economists say, when there is an increase in price, there is an increase in interest, and that increase in interest increases the demand in the asset that you're offering, and the increased demand leads to another increase in the price. So overall, I'm seeing a lot of bullish scenarios when it comes to cryptocurrencies, and maybe particularly when it comes to Bitcoin as well. And ultimately, the large adoption of companies, of cryptocurrencies by certain companies would be good for the economy and would be driving mass adoption.
Okay, exciting times indeed. So this wraps up our discussion. Mariana, thank you very much for being with us. Charles, thanks a lot for joining us. I hope to see you guys maybe in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Have a fantastic FinTech week in Istanbul. Thank you for having us.